Like how did it actually come together?
Well, it comes from even before this piece, I think, this
Yeah.
collaboration, because 2 years ago we were in Colombia, and we've met with Mario and Tata, and actually me and Casey didn't know each other before that, and so we've all met there, and I think we fell in love with this way of working together through these complex technology, and me and Casey were super into like getting into this super amazing but not simple technology of making sound through internet. So it's the third year we're doing something together, and I think this year is quite amazing.
Yeah, for this year was very good to have the possibility to work with you, like years before in the drum day on all the spaces where we had played together, and make the possibility to work about the big social movement that is going on in this moment in Colombia. We still hope, and it's very good to can do it thanks to the telematic field and all the telematic things that we have working. And then in this pandemic moment, we'll have exploded. So I am working in telematics like 7 or 8 years. And just in the year of the pandemic, we have the and 300% of growing of all the applications, all the possibilities.
And it's great to see, as Tata has mentioned, that this technology is not just more widely used thanks to the pandemic, but also a lot more accessible. While the old technology that we had used for our previous collaborations not only needed a lot more network bandwidth, and worries there from computation standards, but also it was command line utilities, things that didn't have graphic interfaces that were a lot harder for individuals to get themselves up and running, and you needed specialized technicians, whereas it's now transitioned into something that you can really, anybody who's interested and has an evening to explore this can really get into it, even with just a smartphone, and a basic internet connection.
you send me something like a sign or something to be sure. I think we are online now. So thank you everyone for being here. Thank you, Marc-André, for supporting this session. We are in the Balance-Unbalance session called The Future Started Now, Think Tank version 2, because like a sign or something to be sure. We were meeting before, like 2 months ago, same people. So welcome, Roger Molina, Leah Barkley, so thank you, Felipe Londoño. I have a feedback, Marc-André. We are so in listening to myself 15 seconds after. Session. Thank you. So again, welcome Roger Molina, Leah Barkley, Felipe Londoño, Rob Lafrene, and Pablo Suarez. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to start with my own presentation, and then we'll go one by one with each of these presentations. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Balance-Unbalance. Let me start my presentation now. And then we have time for questions between ourselves and questions from the audience, if there are any. So I think you are seeing it now. Yes. So let me talk a little bit about Balance-Unbalance. So it is not new that artists have been working with issues related to climate change and environmental crisis already, like Nicolás García Uriburu from Argentina was putting colors in the Gran Canale in Venezia many years ago. We're talking about the 60s and early 70s. But I mean, we have many initiatives like LAGI, the Land Art Generator Initiative, for changing the current situation regarding climate change and in general regarding the environmental crisis. We have people like the people in Latvia, RIX, the Center for New Media Culture, doing different initiatives. I'm not going to stop. I'm going to pass all this very fast, and you can see the video after, and we can stop. You can stop in any of these points. And we have like projects like this one from Tomás Saraceno that is pushing the boundaries regarding like what's happening today to the transportation. I'm sure Rob Lafrene is going to talk about this later. And like in this point, what's happening with air travel and how is this, what is the incidence, what is the fact of all this with air traveling in the world. And there are artists doing different things to bring attention and only to change the current situation. So for example, in The Guardian 2016, you can find, like, I'm not going to stop, as I said before, but 12 different ways of proposing how to bring changes to the current situation. The same way, also published like by The Guardian in 2015, 15 ways of promoting and talking and reaching people when we talk about climate change. So I'm only pointing part of these 15 ideas that they were mentioning about how to change actions. Other artists are doing like actions like, okay, activists like showing some companies are doing some kind of things, and the same companies, you know, that are having pollution, for example, bringing pollution to the world, but they are supporting the art. So how the artists are reacting to this situation. And I found this from Ars Electronica, giving a prize to this publication, where it says, if we continue business as usual, the IT sector will be responsible for 14% of the world's carbon emission by 2040. So this is very important. So regarding all these things, what we do, because we have like a little funnel where we need to put our system, where like Western economy, the energy that we need to run all these things, and what we do with the environment. So I'm always asking, if we try to put or to push more through this little hole of the funnel, the economy, what kind of future do we want, and who decides the future if we push other things, or what are we doing about our future? So all this is regarding, all this meeting is about this. So we started like some projects years ago, more than 10 years ago. One of those is Balance-Unbalance, and let me go through that very fast. The idea is that art can have can act in some way through all this. So we started in 2010 with the first Balance-Unbalance in Argentina, and we did it in different places, like in Canada, in Australia with Leah Barkley, in Arizona, and then in Colombia with Felipe Londoño. We did this, I mean, trying to bring people together. And just before to start the session, Roger Molina was talking about synchronicity and serendipity. And I think that Balance-Unbalance has a lot to do with this, in bringing people together and bringing ideas together, leading to actions, because the idea is to create like some kind of transformative knowledge network and see if we can make some change, even if it's a little drop in the ocean. So between other things, I would take my last few minutes to mention, like, for example, thanks to this, when we met with Pablo Suarez, like a decade ago, I saw him on the TV and I just wrote him. That's serendipity too. Yes, so we started to do projects together, and we started to do a number of sound art miniatures that we were producing, not only bringing juries from all over the world, participants from all over the world, and we were trying to understand better what's happening with climate change and other issues related to the environmental crisis. So we did a lot of several competitions around this, and we were learning because we were using basically for doing the competitions themes that the Red Cross Climate Center was proposing. Was not any topic. We were based on what they were proposing and what they were needing in some way at the time. So this is also part of, we could say, is a spin-off of the Balance-Unbalance project. And in the same way, let me finish with a few more slides. The Balance-Unbalance we did in the UK, including like a part in the Eden project, where some world leaders were meeting like a few months ago. Another one about new value systems in the Netherlands. And finally, we were mentioning just before to start these projects about synchronicity and serendipity, and this ECHO project has a lot to do with that, in trying to connect people. And it's very important to meet in places like this, in meetings like this, because maybe I bring an idea, but already, like Roger was talking about, a different project, and that's part of the idea that we can put together like all these projects, I mean, collaborate in a way to make real changes. So just a couple of months ago in Panoramas, that was joining several conferences, including a mini version of the Balance-Unbalance, we were all meeting exactly the same people, and the idea is that this will be the second part of that same, let's call it, think tank. So the idea is then to have Rob Lafrene, Pablo Suarez, Leah Barkley, Roger Molina, and Felipe Londoño presenting now. And let me tell you just a little bit about Rob, who is going to present now. He's a contemporary art curator for 30 years. He has recently curated exhibition in the US, Scotland, France, Liverpool, UK, India, and Taiwan. Rob is also a board member of IC International. From 1997 to 2014, he was the curator of the of the Art Catalyst. Rob also initiated the Future of Transportation project in Bangalore, India. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and welcome Rob Lafrene. Thank you for being here.
Yes, hello everyone, and it's good to see you all again. I'm just going to try and do a slight experimental format here. At the last Balance-Unbalance, I played a 45-minute slideshow in 10 minutes. This time, I'm not going to try and do that. I'm just going to speak straight to camera. And instead, I have posted some links in the chat, which you're welcome to click on while I'm talking, just so that you can see what I'm talking about, or later when you save it. But try clicking on them now, and then it might be an interesting way of doing a presentation. I'd be quite interested to know if this works out for these short presentations. Okay, so I'm Rob Lafrene, a curator and a writer, and also I'm now doing some art art projects in the last 2 years. And you can see my website to the right there. And I just want to talk a little bit about the geographical location here. You know, we're used to being online, but these two cities, Montreal and Linz, have actually a really strong personal meaning for me, because in the late 90s, the late 70s, I was an artist, a video artist, and in a place called Véhicule in Montreal, in around about 1977, I think, I presented 2 video performances, which were inspired by readings of Marshall McLuhan. One was called Electron Eaters, and the other one was called The Ghost in the Image Tank. And well, it must be 40 years later, I reenacted that performance at a small theatre in Wales. And you can find all of that. You can find that on my website. But I want to start by talking about my morning walk. I went this morning, I live in a valley in southwest France, and I walked up the valley, and where I went was to these 2 apple trees where last year, in September and October, I collected apples for our morning muesli. I went to those apple trees this morning before this talk, and there were no apples on the apple tree. There were no plums on my neighbour's plum tree. There were no nuts on my neighbour's nut tree. The organic farmer who I buy vegetables from on my electric bicycle told me that she is having multiple crop failure, and she's asked to see the French version of the IPCC report. I'm just saying this because it's like an emotional impact about climate change. It's like as if, you know, suddenly your house is gone or on fire or flooded, to suddenly see that this fruit is not there. So I just wanted to start with that kind of an emotional impact. But now I want to go into what we can do about it. I think it's important to say at this point, with COP26 coming again in Scotland, that we do have to combine individual action with collective and governmental and corporate action. We can't get away with it anymore. I don't know if anybody knows any scientists who are going to COP, but I would be interested to know how they're getting there, because flying there is going to keep the problem going. So I run this Facebook group, which you can see in the second link, called Future of Transportation, which is also about bottom-up ways of getting around the planet. And if you're not already a member of that group, please join, because it's got some great posts by members on it. But I want to move to I want to move down to the next link, which is, it takes me back to 2019. That's before the pandemic, but at a point when Extinction Rebellion, as Ricardo has already mentioned, occupied in the Spring Rebellion the Oxford Circus in London, and put a pink boat in the middle of Oxford Circus, blocking the traffic. And I used an aerial image of that taken from a department store to illustrate a series of talks I did as part of Laser Dartington, which were called Art After the Collapse. And a lot of people thought that was a very gloomy title, and it was indeed, because it was about potential extinction. And we had people like Dougal Hine from Dark Mountain, Farhana Yamin, who was one of the early Extinction Rebellion activists. She's also a lawyer who glued herself onto the Shell building in London. But it just told me that you can't really give something a title like that without two really terrible things happening. And, you know, the pandemic then happened, and then the reality that we're now seeing with the IPCC report, and really we're plummeting into catastrophe. That said, we should try to do something about it. So if you go down to the next link, where I say slow travel is a privilege, not a sacrifice. Again, this was written before the pandemic. I was actually commissioned by a Finnish foundation which manufactures elevators to write this essay for money about how I went from London and France to a residency, the Sari residency in Finland by train 3 times, and how I managed to avoid flying from France to Finland 3 times in 1 year. And it was about taking the 3-day train journey between those 2 locations and how you could do it. So if you, and then came the pandemic, and I was actually stuck in London first, the first European lockdown. And Ewan Chardonnay from Makery said, look, you've got to write something about what we can do about the crisis and have carte blanche to write about anything you like. And I was thinking about writing a short story about a bunch of business people meeting on a golf course after ecological collapse and trying to decide what to do about it. And then I suddenly saw these images of grounded planes during the pandemic. So I came up with this idea about retooling the airline industry and taking all these planes and pulling them apart and turning them into trains. So you can read about that idea. And then another very interesting thing happened also during the first pandemic lockdown, which was that the Harvard astronomer, I'm sure you know about him, Roger, Avi Loeb, published his book, Extraterrestrial, about the implications of Unanuma, the object which he claimed, or didn't claim, he said there was evidence for, being an artificial object from an advanced civilization. And so he asks in his book, and this is a subject that I know, Roger, we've been talking about that at conferences, at space conferences and SETI conferences, about what an advanced civilization might be doing if it was observing us now, where they'd be just watching another civilization among many going towards disaster. And I think that book, the most important message about that is, if we have contact with extraterrestrial life, what we could say about what we're doing about it. Okay, here are some solutions. I'm about to write an article about airships and airship travel for Makery. And I just got one company called Flying Whales here in France, and they are developing cargo airships for around the world. And I would like to suggest that this could be the future. Ricardo's already mentioned Thomas Saraceno. I was very lucky to go and see another launch of one of his large solar balloons here up in, it was actually the first art event I went to since the pandemic, up near Angoulême about a month ago, and he's didn't manage to successfully fly then, but now I see from Ewan Chardonnay's posts on WhatsApp, he's managed to fly it in Macon. So we see the first free flight here in Pasha Aerosine, which is the one that you've just mentioned in Argentina. So this is an example of an artist trying to change things and trying to do things. Finally, I just want to end up on what we can do. Obviously, we need to stop flying, but we also have to still drive around if we're living in remote areas. I have a 20-year-old car, old Renault Megane, and I was talking to an artist and inventor, a young artist and inventor called Cedric Carles, and he runs this amazing website called paleoenergetic.org, where you can post your ideas for doing different, for changing things. And they're basically, he talks about retro future, how we can go back to the past in technology for these solutions. And for example, I asked him in an interview, which has yet to be published, what he would do about the problem of transportation. He said, instead of building electric cars, which I think building one electric car is equivalent to 3 years of carbon emissions of driving around in an ordinary petrol car, that governments and industry should instead subsidize the retrofitting of individual cars. And in France, for example, we have this amazing network of small garagistes, and they could be given money to retrofit the cars. That's just one example of what could be done, retrofitting instead of replacing. So there's 2 retrofitting ideas here, one turning planes into trains, and the other one retrofitting cars to electric cars. So let's hope, and that's kind of looking at your B question, Felipe, what would we need to invent to change the course of events, and trying to come up with something realistic? The trains to planes is not realistic. Retrofitting cars is realistic. So that's the end of my talk. I hope you enjoyed looking at the links. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rob. I think that you brought some challenging ideas, and I would love to see like contesting and answering and questioning things between all of us at the very end. Thank you so much. So let's go to Pablo Suarez now. Welcome, Pablo. Pablo is an Associate Director for Research and Innovation at the Red Crescent Climate Center, visiting fellow at the Boston University and artist in residence at National University of Singapore. He's originally a scientist, I must say, but I mean, now he's dealing more and more with art and science. Pablo has consulted for the United Nations, the World Bank, and about 20 other humanitarian and development organizations working in more than 60 countries. Now in Boston or nearby. Welcome, Pablo.
Thank you, Ricardo. Thank you, friends. And hello, dear friends from Ars Electronica. What an honor, what a privilege to be part of this very exciting and out-of-the-box event. As Ricardo mentioned, I used to be a full-time researcher on climate and disasters. Since the late 90s, I've been investigating what can go wrong and what can we do about it. About 17 years ago, I became a humanitarian worker. It is my job to try to help the humanitarian sector to understand what we know and to make plans so that humans don't suffer and we can continue to have dignity and creativity, whether it's about tomorrow's hurricane or long-term sea level rise. Now, let me see if this experiment works. I'm going to push some buttons here, make myself a little bit semi-transparent and go there. There you go. Here's a cartoon that emerged from one of our sessions. We have a global pandemic, we have a changing climate, we have armed conflict across countries or racist violence in cities, an economy that goes up and down. And these stressors, these disasters are collaborating, are creating synergies between each other faster and more successfully, unfortunately, than our own ability to collaborate, to bring people together from authorities, from government, from experts, from civil society, from artists and creators. So I have been very fortunate to, over the past more than a decade, to work with artists who have this talent to create connections. We've worked with Tomás Saraceno and many others. And here's one example of one of the early adventures where we collaborated with the New York Metropolitan Museum of Art. They opened the doors to us before they opened them to the public. We had about 20 people, including about 1/3 scientists, 1/3 humanitarian workers, and 1/3 artists, including choreographers. And this session led to many creative ideas on how to communicate science to the public, including through dance choreographies on early warning and a heat wave flash mob that actually saved lives in Delhi, in India. This is another example of our creative communications. Yours truly running a session at the White House. Instead of a PowerPoint, I said, hello, my name is Pablo, and this is not a frisbee, it's a hurricane. If it hits you in the chest, you're in trouble. Everyone stand up. And guess what? 130 people in the room were confused, but then they understood things about linking science with humanitarian work. This is the kind of work we try to bring to communities at risk. This is in Southern Africa, and people playing a game where there's the fiction of a flood occurring and they have to take action. Now, over the remaining few minutes, I want to share with you one of the initiatives that has me most excited and from which I learned the most about the collaboration possibilities between science, humanitarian work, especially regarding climate risks, and art. Here's the context. In West Africa, the small nation of Togo, there's a hydropower dam that produces electricity. Occasionally, there's so much water coming from the upstream that with or without a dam, there's flooding downstream and people suffer and often die. I should clarify that the dam does not cause flooding, but it changes the character of the flood, often reducing and delaying the peak. But when it happens, it can happen abruptly and catch people by surprise. A lady doing the laundry or a child fishing may see a normal day in the river until there's an overspill. And if there is no warning, then people are caught by surprise. And that had been happening all the time. And there was not enough data and not enough money to produce a proper hydrological model for early warning. So because I was at the time in charge of research as well as innovation, we partnered with scientists who deal with machine learning. And we created a self-learning algorithm that looked at the data and combined human brain power with machine brain power to understand patterns in the very limited data we had, only 3 years of data, and to come up with a sufficiently useful forecasting tool that we posited could lead to an early warning system, which could save lives if only someone helped us make decisions before disaster, after forecast. Now, guess what? Trying to get governments and UN systems and humanitarian mechanisms to give money to a strange, self-learning algorithm thing was proving very difficult. We were not succeeding at getting people to engage, to trust, to resonate. So what did we do? We tapped on the arts. Here is my first ever data sculpture. It is essentially a scientific graph. How much water in the river? On the left is January, on the right is December, and each plane is 1 year, 2011, 2012, all the way to the year before this event. This was displayed at Understanding Risk, a global conference convened by the World Bank, which was held at the Arsenale in Venice, where the Venice Biennale happens. Now, this object was a total outlier in a conference about risk. Everything else was science and policy. Not surprisingly, it attracted the curiosity of curious minds, including some people that were engaged enough to consider bringing their talent, their support, their funding to this project. I want to highlight that it wasn't only important, respected participants. The moment I knew that I had to do more with the arts was when a fellow who worked at this venue, his job was to carry chairs. He decided to take the risk of getting fired to ask me questions about this data sculpture while I was mounting it. Here he is, an Italian fellow asking me questions about an early warning system in Togo in West Africa. When he saw it and he said, "What is that?" And I said, "Well, it's a data sculpture about patterns of flooding in West Africa." He sat down and said, "Raccontami, tell me more." What are the chances of an Italian worker risking getting fired to learn about the science of early warning? I love it. And he loved it. And now we have much more going on. We created an augmented reality version of this where people can interact with data and ask questions about patterns of floods. We created a virtual reality game where you become a Red Cross worker. You can ring the alarm for an early warning. You have to stamp the paperwork to trigger the mobilization of money that can buy the resources to help people. And this was played by very senior people. The person on the top left was at the time, Madame Pascal, the person from the global Red Cross team who made decisions to send money from Geneva to countries to deal with disaster management. Now, because of all these art-infused interventions, we managed to launch the pilot in Togo. And what we did was to first create awareness, where we had the Red Cross being invited to radio stations as soon as the early warning was issued. And there was a pre-recorded spot which tapped on the traditional musical instruments of this part of West Africa, which were used for two things: warning people about the invading tribe to steal cattle and warning people about floods. So we tapped on art for the early warning system to communities. Communities, even if it was a sunny day, received information and often visitors from the Red Cross about the fact that we were told by this new forecasting tool that a flood was very likely to come. People self-organized. We didn't have much money, so they themselves constructed shelters on elevated ground. And people, especially mothers and children, could go on a safe day before the flood started to this shelter. We also distributed water purification and other things. And guess what? All of this was done before the overspill. The action was taken before the flood. And this artwork actually helped improve humanitarian work. Because of this pilot that was proven successfully, we have been getting more and more support, first from the German government, then from the Netherlands. And just yesterday, Mr. Secretary General of the UN spoke about the need to invest more in anticipatory action, and more is happening. Here's the synthesis, my last statement for now. Art can expand what we think of and create a level of bonding, a level of trust, a level of curiosity, a level of appetite for connecting what we know with what we do. So thank you, Ars Electronica, for creating awesomeness. Let's see how we can bring your awesomeness to the space of climate risk management. We have a lot of work ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pablo. So many things to learn and to do. Yes, I mean, very interesting. Before we go to Leah Barkley, very interesting that in some way several of us, we are addressing topics of synchronization and serendipity and how we were meeting, etc., etc. So let me bring briefly, before introducing Leah, that when we first met, Pablo, 10 years ago, you were, I mean, again, Balance-Unbalance is about meeting people, scientists, designers, electronic artists, curators, and trying to work in a more transdisciplinary way as far as we can, and trying to find solutions, local, regional, global, if possible. And then how we were meeting about, Pablo, you came to the second Balance-Unbalance 10 years ago, driving your own car. We didn't have any money to do it. You were talking about funding. Yes, and we were going for lunch with Leah, and you were saying, why don't you make some music? Yes, for the next COP, right? Because it was in South Africa, I think. But I said, well, we don't have time, but why don't we do a competition? Yes, and we started with a competition of sound art miniatures that was part of serendipity and also synchronicity. And then Leah was organizing the Balance-Unbalance in Australia. And also, as another example that I love to give always of synchronicity and serendipity, when we were having the Balance-Unbalance in Arizona State University, for one day was Roger Molina there, for one day was Pablo S.O.S there, but you met and I asked you to grab a sandwich and to bring it together and to talk, because you were working in two parallel huge networks. But I said, at some point, yes, I know it's serendipity. I mean, maybe it's too open, but I thought, well, these two people are going to meet, and at some point, this is going to work. So, and here we are, and let's see what else we can do. So, Leah, very welcome. Australian sound artist, designer, and researcher. Leah's work has been exhibited internationally by the Smithsonian Museum, the UNESCO, and Al Gore's Climate Reality, between many other places. Leah's installations have been presented across the world, from Times Square to the Eiffel Tower. Now she's currently a lecturer in design at USC, Sunshine Coast, Australia. What a beautiful place, by the way. Thank you, Leah. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Ricardo, and thank you so much for having me on this panel. It's a great privilege to be here and be part of this conversation. I'm joining you today from Cubby Cubby country on the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, Australia, and that's the location that I'm kind of going to frame this talk around, really. So extending on some of the ideas that I spoke about during the last panel, I really wanted to look at some specific projects that are happening right now and that are kind of unfolding in this region, and look at how I guess one particular area or one particular community can be a little bit of a catalyst for change, and I guess an incubator for some of these ideas. And I think that serendipity and synchronicity that we're talking about, has so many beautiful connections with this region and some of the balance, some of the ideas sort of behind balance-unbalance as well. So I guess at this point, I'm really interested to know, how we can build these new models of working together in these interdisciplinary research projects, and how we can kind of continue these global arts initiatives in response to climate change without traveling as well. And what it really is, at the core of climate-inspired art that can create change. And I think, that example that Pablo just gave us there of the data sculpture, it's just such a perfect example of how, climate art and that intersection of art and science can create that curiosity and create that conversation in a community that can really create change. So I guess, I've sort of gone from working on very complex interdisciplinary projects to also looking at very sort of simple climate action initiatives embedded in a community and looking at how these can really create change over time. But I'm sort of equally fascinated by how at this point in time we can create better tools for virtual collaborations as well, and knowledge sharing. And obviously a platform like this is a prime example. So the Balance-Unbalance network more broadly, and I guess this idea of connection and synchronicity has been a really, quite pivotal and important part of my own practice as an artist. I was reflecting on this earlier today and thinking about all of the incredible projects I've connected with at different Balance-Unbalance conferences, the connections that some of those projects have made and how they've expanded into these, quite large scale interdisciplinary research initiatives in different parts of the world. We were reflecting just before this panel started on some of the connections in Vanuatu, and Sandy Sir, who's a community chief in Vanuatu, his initial connections with Balance-Unbalance sort of demonstrated how he could use his traditional knowledge and the cultural activities that he was doing in Vanuatu at that point in time around tourism with Aluatan women's water music as a way to really draw attention to climate change in the region. And, just this week, he's co-authored a paper with a team of academics on those initiatives. So it's exciting to see the kind of ripple effect of some of these projects as well. But, for me personally, I'm really interested in how rapidly things have changed in the last 2 years as well, how much artistic practice has changed, the way artists are presenting work is changing, the way that we're actually connecting and collaborating changing at such a rapid pace. And, prior to COVID, I spent a pretty good decade really traveling constantly, to conferences, to festivals, to exhibitions, presenting work that was responding to climate change and facilitating various large-scale projects in communities. But there was, always, I guess, this tension and this somewhat inherent contradiction in some of this work. And, this very much relates to, I guess, some of the things Rob was saying earlier around travel as well. And I was reflecting on that after the previous panel. But I'm interested in this idea of local impact and global connections. And so, prior to COVID, January last year, I moved back to the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, Australia, where I am now, to take up this new position at the University of the Sunshine Coast and really look at how this local region could kind of be an incubator for this kind of work, really set up some of these ideas and embed them in the community. So I wanted to just share a couple of pretty brief examples that are happening in real time right now. And I'm going to screen share just from these websites to give you let me just... No, it doesn't want to let me screen share. I don't think I've got screen share access, and I might just talk about them if it's not going to let me screen share. That's all right. I'll just talk about them. And I'll share the links in the chat as well. So the first initiative I wanted to talk about is a project called Listening in the Wild, which was commissioned for Horizon Festival last year. And this is a project very much about the value of listening to local environments and the power of acoustic ecology to really connect us to a place and time. So had it have been presented at the festival as a physical experience, it would have been the community coming together to travel through these environments and participate in listening activities and workshops. But because we were in COVID lockdown and we were unable to have a physical audience, we basically created these as live experiences streaming online. And I worked in collaboration with two incredible artists, Lyndon Davis, who's a Gubbi Gubbi traditional custodian, an Indigenous artist in the local area. And Lyndon has also been a big part of the Balance-Unbalance network. He gave a welcome to country at the 2013 conference. And at the 2015 conference in Arizona, it was the first time he experimented with this idea of actually doing a remote welcome to country, this idea of kind of handing knowledge over from the Sunshine Coast region to Arizona. And we connected that with the work in Vanuatu as well. So as part of this Listening in the Wild project, Lyndon was talking about local stories in the Sunshine Coast region, the importance of connection to country and listening to the environment and telling stories of climate action and climate change from his perspective in relation to these local environments. So we worked with 3 different ecosystems and, an ocean tour out to a local reef and island where we had hydrophones, underwater microphones, in the water where we could hear live humpback whales and actually Lyndon talking about what he was hearing beneath the surface and telling stories of this area. And this project was accompanied by documentary photography by Dr. Tricia King, who's an incredible photographer, also based at the University of the Sunshine Coast. And so the idea was that the photography really drew people into these landscapes before these deep listening experiences. And this was, I guess, an experiment in many ways, how we could really create a live experience of these different ecosystems during lockdown, but also meant that suddenly this project that was designed for a regional festival in a local community was globally accessible. So, we ended up with people listening from different parts of the world who were also in lockdown at that point in time. So that kind of idea has extended into a range of other initiatives. And as a couple of examples at the same festival this year, Horizon Festival, again in the Sunshine Coast, which has unfortunately been cancelled due to COVID lockdown again, but with a whole range of projects that were still able to be continued in some capacity or another. And the 2 that I wanted to speak about in particular is an exhibition called Sites of Connection, which is basically artists working with scientists in response to climate change. 6 artists who have had a sustained collaboration with scientific collaborators. So not science communication work, but truly looking at that intersection between art and science in creative practice. And as part of the Biosphere Soundscapes project, we've got a geodesic dome inside the gallery with 8-channel surround sound that is playing back the soundscapes from UNESCO biosphere reserves across the planet that have been recorded over the last decade, and also pulling in live streams. And a number of those live streams have actually been established through connections made at the Balance-Unbalance conference with Grant Smith, who is one of the founders of SoundCamp, who presented it at Balance-Unbalance 2015, has been a big part of helping us establish many of those live streams in different biosphere reserves across the planet. And those live streaming soundscapes are used for both biodiversity analysis to measure the health in these different ecosystems and used for these immersive installations and creative projects. And Rob McKay as well, his work with the monarch butterflies through biosphere reserves in Mexico is also streaming into the dome at particular times. And the other project that I wanted to mention briefly, which is just opening next week as a global digital platform as well, is an exhibition called Final Call. And this exhibition has commissioned 6 artists to respond to climate change in the Marucci Botanic Gardens and create these provocative experiences. So it's a site-specific exhibition, but they've developed this 360 digital platform so that anyone, anywhere on the planet will be able to essentially visit the artist studios in these virtual artist studio tours and engage with these works. And there's some incredible pieces there. And, you know, as one example, Courtney Coombs, who is an Australian artist, has created a neon work that, you know, is text-based neon work that says sometimes it's the little things. And a very simple idea, but speaking to that importance, which I guess has been raised several times in this panel already, that, you know, all of our tiny actions matter in the spectrum of everything that's happening, that those small actions and steps, you know, all become part of that big picture. So a very simple installation and a simple idea, but already has had quite a profound impact in the community and how people are talking about it. You know, this neon work has started a conversation amongst young students at the University of the Sunshine Coast talking about climate change. So this, you know, simple and subtle yet quite provocative idea. So I'll leave the links in the chat to be able to access that digital platform, which is launching next week, and to be able to explore some of those works that are all happening in this region. And the final project that I just wanted to mention briefly is Floating Land, which is an art and ecology event that is happening just up the road here in the Noosa Biosphere Reserve, launching in about 4 weeks. And I think that's a beautiful connection just to finish off with, because I curated a version of this festival just over a decade now, and we were looking at the theme of the festival and the idea of artists responding to water culture and looking at how art can really be a catalyst of change. And that's when I discovered the Balance-Unbalance network and the call for papers. And so we went to Balance-Unbalance in Montreal in 2011 and actually presented the outcomes from Floating Land. And so it's quite nice to reflect that, you know, over 10 years later, we're continuing this conversation in so many different ways and so many connections that have really grown since that 2011 event and been seeded. And I think for me, you know, the core ideas haven't changed dramatically, but I'm really coming back to this idea of working directly with local communities, looking at this idea of local impact and global connections, really respecting and acknowledging and being guided by First Nations knowledge systems and Indigenous practitioners in these, working in these spaces and really leading some of these conversations. You know, so I guess while I've been remaining in one location as a result of COVID, it's also been quite profoundly influential to see and reflect on all of the connections that's possible at a really local level, and to see how these projects can really create change over time. And I think that's enough from me for now. And I apologize for not being able to screen share those links, but I'll pop them in the chat.
Thank you so much, Leah. Thank you so much for being here today. Also for, once again, for helping to organize the Balance-Unbalance in 2013. That was an amazing opportunity. And you said art as a catalyst of change. And that's the idea of the Balance-Unbalance, like meeting people and using art as a catalyst. And we as artists are bringing together scientists and curators and people from leadership and management. You know, before introducing Roger, briefly, probably you hear me saying this before, sorry, but I mean, when we did the 2011 Balance-Unbalancing at Montreal, yes, with Concordia, and Pablo was coming and you were coming. I mean, we didn't have any money, basically, only really, almost nothing. But you know, I was able to knock the doors of different people around the university and in other places, just people from political science, from leadership and management, and they were bringing together, and we put the conference together. And right after the conference, everyone was so excited that everyone was saying also, okay, why don't we do another one? And my reaction was saying, no, why not? Well, because I want to see some result. It's not just about making conferences or having a roundtable, or we need to do something. And then, because of that meeting, again, synchronicity and serendipity with Pablo, and we were starting slowly the sound art competition, and you start to see, yes, but he is seeing from the scientific and humanitarian organization that we as an artist, we can do something. So you start to see some concrete results that we can do something, but it's not only goodwill that you see that can have some impact. So I think that then Balance-Unbalance is still alive, okay, and we are doing things, but that's the kind of things that were happening and why we are still doing these kind of actions. So let me welcome Roger Molina, physicist, astronomer, and executive director of the Leonardo publication at MIT Press, professor of arts and technology, and professor of physics at UT Dallas. Roger is also former director of the Observatoire Astronomique de Marseille-Provence. And Roger Molina was the principal investigator of the NASA Extreme Ultraviolet Explorer satellite at UC Berkeley. Welcome very much. Welcome here, Roger. Thank you for being at this session again.
Okay, thank you, Ricardo. Can you see my first slide?
Yes.
Thank you. So I've titled my talk today, 10% for Art, Redesigning Human Nature. I could have put 30% for art, but the provocation is that art is essential for human survival, and I'll go into that in some detail. I'm going to argue also that we need to redesign human nature, and I'll explain that. Now, the ideas I'm presenting today come from a variety of people. Some of us meet on a weekly basis. We're called the post-pandemic provocateurs. We don't throw sticks, stones, or bombs. We throw ideas to trigger autopoietic change in the complex system of the world. And we now have a post-pandemic pirate publishing. As Gary Hall in his book, Pirate Philosophy explained, it's the pirates who actually figure out how to make the world better, and it's the kings and emperors who take the credit. So let me encourage all the pirates in this community of practice to keep working. So human nature needs redesigning, re-evolving. Oops, sorry, I just clicked one. I'm having screen confusion here. So how does a human being make decisions? Well, we get sensory input. Oh, it's going to rain. I can see. I better take an umbrella with me. And the human senses have allowed millions of people to survive. But I want to argue that we now live on a planet of 8 billion, soon 10 billion humans, and human senses are inadequate to allow the survival of 10 billion people. Yes, for surviving millions of people, but not 10 billion. I want to just thank Newton Harrison that I'm working with closely. He's 87 years old. He's been a climate artist since the 1970s. And his wife just died, but he now has a new project called the Ocean Sensorium. And my version of what he's trying to do is human beings must be equipped with augmented senses so we can see the very big and the very small. Yep, viruses are very small and we can't see them. Maybe we need humans to have augmented senses so they can see the viruses attacking them. We need extended senses. So as an astronomer, visible light is wonderful. But the universe doesn't care about what humans can see. It emits X-rays, it emits infrared, it emits gamma rays. So we must also invent human senses that let us access the data around us that our senses are ignorant of. Artists have made artwork that allow you to be aware of the carbon monoxide level in your room or the carbon dioxide level when you go out. Our senses don't detect carbon dioxide or carbon monoxide. They don't taste of anything. They don't smell of anything. You can't touch them. And then we need totally new kinds of senses. And here I'm going to argue that we all want a society that's inclusive, diverse, sustainable. I believe to do that, we need to redesign human nature by expanding the sensorium. And that's what artists are expert at. How do you create experiences for people that changes their minds? That is what artists do. They create experiences that change people's minds. And so, Pablo, I'm on board with you that art and humanitarian work go hand in hand. There's a new initiative in Europe right now, which is just in its birth state, called the New European Bauhaus. And they propose a tripod of beauty, sustainability, and inclusion. When I originally heard about this initiative, beauty, who cares about beauty? Data artists are the people who will create new kinds of beauty. Data artists will create experiences for people that draw on the big data flood that we're all immersed in. The pandemic is the least of the data floods. And data artists, by creating those experiences, can create desires in people. That's what artists do. They create experiences, but they also create desires in people. So I'm going to get a little bit more provocative. How can we include all living beings on the planet in the concept of democracy? Only humans are allowed to vote right now. Maybe plants should vote. Diversity, we all want to be inclusive, but maybe nobody is noble. We want lots of strange people, hybrid people, abnormal people who are differently abled with different sensoria. Yeah, we all can taste red wine and say it's good, but maybe different humans need to be able to taste different things depending on the pollution level or the climate change in their own neighborhood. And that's where we get back to Leah on, we need to reinvent the concept of the local, because the local is crucial to the survival of the global. 10% for art also addresses not only democracy, but I'm working with a Texas judge, John Marshall, who now does Zoom trials. And he says, almost all the evidence I'm presented in court is provided by machines, and I cannot cross-examine the machine. Excuse me, sir, were you drunk when you witnessed this crime? Well, the machine cannot answer that kind of a question. Because when a machine is drunk, maybe the electricity was flickering and the machine became unreliable. You cannot cross-examine a machine. And then he complains that a lot of the evidence that he sends to people to jail about, the evidence changes. DNA. Every 10 years, we measure it in different and better ways. And the person we sent to jail 10 years ago wasn't even in that room. It was someone else. The DNA evidence has changed because the machine has been improved. So as I said before, democracies were invented only to consult humans as part of collecting decision making. But as my best enemy, Bruno Latour, likes to say, We are not as numerous as we think. Humans are a small minority of the living beings on this planet. So how can we consult all living beings on this planet so that the whole planet ecology evolves without a catastrophe? What are our octopuses thinking at the moment? How would they vote? Well, I'm being anthropocentric because the concept of voting is a human concept. How would plants think about this? And then we get back into indigenous knowledge and indigenous cultures. Yes, science is a good method for certain problems, but we need different ways of knowing. And many indigenous groups have very successful ways of knowing that allow survival at the local scale. And Jonathan Keats, who some of you may have heard of, is a very famous provocateur. He's created the San Jose Future Democracies Lab, automated government prototyping systems. And part of his initiative is how can we give the equivalent of votes to plants, octopuses, squids, maybe even flies and mosquitoes should be allowed to vote. 10% for art must also address that human beings themselves have hybridized. I now spend at least 6 hours a day online and the rest of my life in my physical environment. I claim this is a totally different human nature than when I was born in 1950. We are not the same human nature today if you spend half your time online and the rest of your time in the physical world. Human nature has changed, is changing, and maybe we can redesign human nature so that the ecologies of the world survive. Contemporary brain and behavioral sciences give new understandings of how humans learn and develop expertise. David Peake held a workshop in 2002 where the provocation, let's close down all the universities in the world. What would we put in their place? Not universities, that's for sure. We must design universities and learning institutions local. Certain things require hands-on embodied cognition. You cannot do that online. But in a community school, people can make things with their hands and build their intuitions. So I know in Brazil, there are some amazing experiments, and also in Bangalore. Most of the students didn't have Wi-Fi. So going online for education was a meaningless idea. Instead, they reinvented the neighborhood community school, where students of all ages, not by age group, learned how to use Zoom. So, thank you for helping and creating a new sensorium. We must augment human senses, expand human senses, and invent new senses, and redesign our human institutions to include every kind of living organism on this planet. And yes, viruses should have a right to vote also. Thank you for your attention. And just to close, my name is Molina, which is an anagram of animal. I am proud to be an animal. In Czech, Molina means raspberry. My ancestors were raspberry farmers. Maybe we should also redesign how we name humans. The way we name people was invented in different cultures so many decades ago. How should we name ourselves and our children in the age of climate change, pandemics? How do we create intellectual dating systems where synchronicity, coincidence, and serendipity are designed to provide a balanced ecosystem that survives? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Animal Molina. So we are all animals.
I'm
Yes.
proud to be an animal, and
Me too.
I think most scientists would not say that.
So thank you so much, Roger. A lot of interesting things, as always, like, well, local and global, political systems and value systems, and the universities, yes, and that the challenge of trying to do things in universities and working inside a heavy, strong, old structure most of the time, and trying to do things that matters, that we think are relevant to the students and for teaching and learning process. And let me mention two brief things before to introduce Felipe Londoño. One is that Roger was from the very beginning in Balance-Unbalance for the first one in 2010. That it was a small gathering in Buenos Aires. You was trusting us that because and you were online because you were already online. So we were like pioneering the online communication at that time. So thank you, Roger, for supporting this. And something important, because you was talking about the beauty. Yes, was talking about beauty and survival. And I want to mention the book of David Rothenberg that is called Survival of the Beautiful, Art, Science, and Evolution. David has been also a participant of several Balance-Unbalance conferences, and his work is very interesting between what he's doing in music, between performing with birds, with whales, and cicadas, and more. So, but this particular book is very close related to what you were mentioning before, Survival of the Beautiful, Art, Science, and Evolution. So, our last presenter for this session, the Future Started Now session, Felipe Londoño from Colombia, Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Design at Universidad Jorge Tadeo Lozano, and director of the International Image Festival held in Colombia since 1997. Former president of the University of Caldas from 2014 to 2018, and also Felipe is an electronic arts curator, researcher in the field of design, art and science, and creative industries. Also, we did together Balance-Unbalance in Colombia. It was a huge encounter, was very, very interesting in 2016 in Manizales. Thank you, Felipe, for being with us.
Thank you, Ricardo. Hello, everyone. I will share my screen. Okay, this sound. Oh, okay. Okay, regarding the central theme of Ars Electronica, a new digital deal, and the name of the panel, The Future Started Now, I present the interrelationship between art, design, and science from an interspecies perspective as a pact that will need to be established in order to achieve the survival of the planet. Interspecies was the central theme of the International Image Festival 2021 in Manizales and Bogotá, Colombia. Some of the exhibited works are presented below. For indigenous people, the balance of the planet is related to healing technologies, a science that seeks to balance the planet through interspecies. This image is part of the work of Barbara Santos, Healing as Technology, a book, which is based on interviews with experts in the Amazon. Indigenous knowledge live in stones, lakes, and forests, is present in their ancestral language, and it is transmitted from generator to generator in men and women who live in the jungle. The Chilean artist Constanza Piña is inspired by the indigenous people and reinterprets the technological and scientific codes, system, and processes of Latin American cultures, textile mathematics and ancestral computing results, and in installation and a book that today can be found in the virtual room of the Image Fest. The quipu is a good example of the recovery of an ancestral knowledge that united us with nature. Quipus are nodes that represent data population, data related to population, their economic system, agriculture's products, among others. These data storage devices have been worked by other artists such as Gabriel Vanegas, Sandra Tavares, among others. Along the same lines and from the sound, Andres Gaona recovers the sound of the traditional bagpipes of the Caribbean coast, especially of the Kogi community in Santa Marta, Colombia, in his work Cuisi Covidae. On the other hand, Flautoamericanismos, sound landscape by Giovanni Betancourt bring us closer to the timbral resource and variants of the contemporary language applied to the transverse flute in the sound richness of the three representative works of Latin American literature. The concept of interspecies is widely deepened by Rocio Brenger in her work G5, where she puts in dialogue the species of the five kingdoms existing in the world: mineral, vegetable, animal, human, and machine. All of them equal before the law and the same rights. She proposes in her performance a universal declaration of interspecies rights through the Interspecies Organization for the Future of the Life on Earth. Jazz composer and clarinetist David Rothenberg, that Ricardo mentioned before, has written and performed on the relationship between humanity and nature, relationship between humanity and nature for many years. And this is the author of many books. Of some them is of the Why Birds Sing, on how to make music with birds. Caroline Jones, curator and critic, mentioned that our whole life is based on symbiosis, a kind of codependency that is contrasted with our interaction in it. Between worlds of contemporary bioart and scientific theories, Jones suggests that the universe is saturated with other species what biological life of which we know little, and that going from Homo sapiens to Homo symbiotic is necessary evolution. That is what Bioremediaciones presents, the work of Juan Pablo Ferlat, that focuses on the ability of fungi to intervene as a healer in the balance of the biosphere. Bioremediation is a project born from the belief that healing our relationship with all living beings in humanity's most urgent and transcendent commitment. It is this dialogue with the invisible of mushroom and minerals that Andres Rosso presents, comparing the brands of use of culinary utensil with the universe in culinary astronomy. Patterns there are repeated and words that talk from the visual. The soundscape beauty, a hybrid work of art between biology and technology, but by Johnny Di Blasi, uses artificial intelligence to interact with different cultures of social bacteria and show them artistically from the sound and the visual. In the context of politics, the Chinese artist Xuan Xiji, who works in bioart and biodesign, writes in the phrase "I want a lesbian for president with pasta," which become food for the mold and bacteria that occupy the place. The word represents a struggle for the representation and power of minorities and calls into question human political or human political power before other species. On the other hand, school mutation is a short that talks about the social fabric, post-traumatic stress in cases of repression, and the identity of a generation that in multiple latitudes has been violated by its social condition, its body, its origin, its race, among others. Finally, I present the work Infinitely Yours by Miwa Matrajek, an experimental video art that explores the chaos of the world through shadow of her own body that are projected on screen. Matrajek's shadows can cross oceans, flyovers, jungles, and forests, and touch clothes in a kind of plea for the planet's survival. All of the above have inspired us to create a program in design, art, and science that is based on interdisciplinary relationship and the crossing of borders between each of the disciplines, all fragmented through academies that make little possible their interconnection. The purpose is to investigate the line proposed in the graph to make the great challenge of contemporary society from an integral perspective. This program is organized by the University of Chile, the Museum of Contemporary Art of Chile, the University of Buenos Aires, the Federal University of Goiás, and the Universidad Jorge Tadeo Lozano in Colombia. Among them, the UNESCO chair and a doctorate in design, art, and science are proposed in alliance with many other universities and organizations in Latin America and the world. As a synthesis, all the narratives that we observe are an explanation that everything from the smallest to the great planetary phenomena is somehow interconnected. Design, art, and science is presented as a device for approaching the unknown to see beyond what is close to us. Many of the works present focus on this connection between the domestic, the technological, the microscopic, and the universal. The work of artists, designer, and scientific tries in certain way to be another type of lens, so that from the sensible we understand these chains of dependence and relationship we all find ourselves. And we realize that much beyond the form in which we always organize ourselves as a society, there will be flaws that will not be able to retain. Thank you, Ricardo. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Felipe. Thank you all for the presentations. So we are going now to a last part of our session where I would love that you can question, critique, ask, comment, add to each of the other presentation. But meanwhile, to give you 1 minute to think about that, not a lot of time, but anyway. So I realized that I didn't introduce myself, so I will give you a minute, so I will introduce myself now. So because I didn't say what I'm doing here. So I'm a professor of music and media arts at Concordia University in Canada, and the founder of the symposia Balance-Unbalance on art, science, and environmental crisis. And I have been director of Hexagram years ago in Canada and researcher of UNESCO in France. And same as Roger and Rob, I'm a board member of IC International. And last but not least, I'm a composer and artist working on transdisciplinary actions with science and emergent technologies. So, and that's part of what, because I'm doing all these things like most of us, that I'm trying to bring together so different profiles to this conversation. And as I was asking before, I mean, if you have something to add to other people comment, I would love to do that. Pablo is going first. Great.
I just want to express my deep gratitude to this session already. This may not work, but I think it will. Here's an idea that emerged in my head because of this. I am just a mini background. One of the main causes of our changing climate is the propensity of humans to eat beef. Beef and cattle related gases, not just CO2, but especially methane, are as much contributing to climate change as all transportation in the planet together. So I am working with others to try to promote the replacement of beef consumption with alternative forms of protein that are more climate friendly, including edible insects, especially mealworms, very nutritious, very healthy, extremely climate friendly, and good for food security and so on. Now, we need to do much more research. It's not fully understood how these bugs grow under different conditions. We need ways to understand the metabolic activity of mealworms based on humidity, temperature, substrate on which they're growing, and so on. Leah mentioned this business of sound ecology. How about putting a tiny, tiny microphone in the place where these creatures are growing, and then to use the sound created by mealworms as an indicator of their metabolic activity and how quickly they turn food into protein. Now, this could also become an ingredient for chacarera or other forms of music. So I'm like blown away that I know that my collaborators are going to like the scientific value of this. They're going to like the creative value of making it user-friendly or eater-friendly. I don't know how you call it. And it's all because of this session and Leah and then Roger talking about, I don't think that mealworms can vote in a way that we can understand, but we need to create conditions for us and them and everyone to prosper. So thank you for this. And I don't know what will happen, but it's exciting.
Yes, just briefly to mention that I think Leah was bringing Cowspiracy, right? In 2015, when it was going to be released, you brought it to the Balance-Unbalance 2015, and that was exactly about what Pablo was mentioning. I don't know who is first, if Roger or Rob. Who? So Rob, okay, Rob, and then Roger. No, you're muted, Rob.
I actually just, interestingly, I know we should be checking other screens, but I just got a comment. I actually posted a picture of Pablo on the Future Transportation Group and saying this is happening now. And a woman artist I know, an educator, just said it was a great, that it's a great conversation, but did question why we have 5 guys in beards and only 1 woman. So I just thought I ought to register that comment to everybody, because right now there is a big gender imbalance on this panel. And then the other thing I wanted to say, Roger just put a provocative thing in the chat. I would like to suggest, Roger, that you put 2 words into that question. One of the issues is that I think there are too many humans. Should we encourage high consuming parents to have fewer children? Because of this is the imbalance, that it's not just the number of people that's being sustained, it's the people in the countries that are burning the carbon at a higher rate that should be considering reducing their populations. That's yeah. And then because this population thing often comes out as a racist kind of viewpoint about the global South. Let's face it, this is the elephant in the room. So why not suggest that the capitalist West has fewer children? That's my suggestion. Finally, and then I'm going to leave the room for others. I just want to say a quick shout out to the people in Linz. I was happy to take part in Art Meets Radical Openness last year. And if there's anyone from Art Meets Radical Openness, I did a performance called Close to the Water in a single scull rowing boat, but I had to do it virtually because of the pandemic. So hi to Art Meets Radical Openness. Thanks.
Thanks, Rob. Roger?
Yeah, so let me just start off with, I started as an undergraduate student in 1968. And at the time, there was a discussion of the Gaia hypothesis. And indeed, part of the discussion was that the number of people on the planet was unsustainable. Well, the Chinese government tried to do that through legal means and failed. As Ricardo or whoever it was mentioned, it's not how many people on the planet, but whether all kinds of people on the planet should survive. And that gets into the comment about we have 6 people and there's only 1 woman. Well, there's a field of research called the science of team science. And there we don't talk about diversity, we talk about heterogeneity. So I'm 71 years old. We have no teenagers in the panel. Maybe we should have 13-year-old children also giving us their opinion. We all have 2 arms. Maybe we should also have handicapped people in the panel. They think differently because they have different sensory limitations. So yes, heterogeneous groups come up with ideas that homogeneous groups will never come up with, but there's no recipe or no formula. But I am just amazed every time I look at the data art, Pablo, of the human population. I mean, how can 8 billion people function in the same way that 100 million people were able to survive on this planet when emigration started from Africa? I think maybe I'm wrong. There were maybe 100 million humans when we started emigrating from Africa. So population density, yep, I think I love Paris, but putting 500 people in a metro is the best way to spread viruses ever invented. Yes, it's energy efficient, but pandemic efficient also. So, yes, art, science, and design, Felipe. Somehow we need 10% for art, 10% for science, 10% for design, and then the rest of the money can go to the bureaucrats. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Roger. Well, related to what you were saying in terms of diversity, also young people, I had a few questions that I shared, at least some of those with you before. And one of those that maybe you want to comment, someone in the roundtable, is if you would be 20 or 30 years old, what would you do in terms of the current situation? Yes, we are all a little bit older than that, except Leah maybe. But what do you think? If we were much younger and we know a little bit about the current situation, there are a lot of things that probably we don't know, but there are things that we know about the crisis. So when you talk with younger people, what do you think that we could say about that? I think Roger or Pablo or anyone.
Okay, well, in 1968, it was make love, not war. That
Yes.
doesn't work either.
No. Yes. So.
Yeah, I can tell you what we gathered from a global event yesterday, convened by my team, the Red Cross, Red Crescent Climate Center, for and with youth. There were a few hundred people from, I don't remember, 60 or 70 countries across the planet. And of course, these were mostly self-selected, engaged, curious, generous, smart kids who are already trying to do good things in terms of the consequences of changing climate. One thing that is very, very clear is that they are feeling that we, meaning humanity, but mostly we older folks, have been knowingly, and in the beginning, not intentionally, but by now it constitutes intentionality. We are giving them a ticking bomb. We are bestowing on them not just a dysfunctional system, but a system that we know is designed for their failure. We're working with professional cartoonists, and one of the cartoonists has this awesome cartoon. There's a father and child on a beach house in the coast, and the father has a hand on the shoulder of the son and says, "One day, son, all this will be yours and underwater." So everything we do and fail to do, they read as, I am giving you a screwed up planet. I am giving you a screwed up life. If we don't mobilize the arts to enable them to process the unbearable, intolerable injustice that we are perpetrating on them, as well as mobilizing the arts, creativity, design, as well as science and humanitarian work and more, to help them find ways to reduce how bad it gets. It will get worse. How much worse depends on how much we address the causes, but also begin to address the consequences. I'm not happy with how dominant the issue of carbon is when we talk about climate, when there's already enough carbon in the atmosphere to guarantee that the increased frequency and intensity and unprecedented violence of extreme events, forest fires, floods, hurricanes, you name it, we need to help them channel their fury in ways that are productive. And I think art can help.
Thank you, Pablo. Yes. But in fact, we were talking about success and failure in some way. And I was thinking that I remember when I was first seeing you on TV, was a documentary or something like that. I said, who is this guy talking about geoengineering? What's that? And I didn't know where you're coming from or that you were from the Red Cross Climate Center or anything. But I remember you were giving some failure examples. If I remember well, because this was about 10, 11 years ago, you were talking about in Senegal, some people that were moving a river from one place to the other, and you were giving an example of failure that was supposed to be success and was a failure. And I was thinking if any of you wants to share any success or failure story, because we learn a lot from failure stories. I mean, we all learn in our life about our own failures. So we still have a few minutes, not that much, but I think that yes, Roger, if you want to share.
Okay, so I'm gonna reply to you with a joke, which is an illustration of mind over matter. So a month ago, I had my hip replaced. I have a bionic hip, and I can now walk and drive again. But before that, my doctor said, "Oh, you've got your blood pressure is too high. You've got to stop drinking." Well, I was born in Paris, and every teenage child in Paris eats wine at lunch with their parents. You're 13, you get one glass of wine at lunch. I have drunk alcohol every day of my life since I was 13. I stopped drinking alcohol one day, and I have not drunk a drink in 9 months. I just want to use that as an example of mind over matter. Yes, alcohol and tobacco and other things are addictive, but we can stop our bodies from doing certain things. And it's as simple as, I live in Dallas, everybody drives everywhere. Well, during the pandemic, I discovered I could not walk to the supermarket because of my hip. Now I can. So like in Paris, to go shopping, you go walking. Stop driving to go shopping. Shop locally in a shop that you can walk to. Thank you. So I guess my example is I've stopped drinking alcohol, and it's possible to exert mind over matter.
Good. Thank you, Roger. Anyone else who wants to share some ideas? Rob, please. You're muted.
Yeah, I'm just going back to the diversity thing, and I'm thinking about what I said before about individual action, and thinking that actually I sit on lots of these kind of panels, and I should have a personal policy of not sitting on a panel that's diverse enough. So sorry about that, Ricardo, but I think we're going to have to do something about the diversity before I'll do another one of these. Okay. It has to be the individual. It's not just the top down, it's the bottom up. So I just made that choice that I don't sit on a panel that's not diverse anymore. And by the way, I'm going to stop being on the ICEA board after Barcelona for exactly the same reason, that there's not enough young people. There's not enough, new blood on that board. So I'm going to leave after Barcelona. I think our individual practices have got to affect our collective practices across the board. I'm not, however, going to stop drinking wine yet, Roger. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Yes, I think that diversity is also, thank you for the comment. And of course, every input is welcome to improve what we can do. I think that has to do with age, has to do with gender. Also, in this case, has to do with people coming from very different profiles, very different experiences, and very different parts of the world. That makes a lot of difference too. So it's diverse in some aspects, it's not diverse in other aspects. That's my vision, at least. But thanks for the input. So we only have a very few minutes. Let me ask one more thing and then we go. It's just that it was mentioned, for example, at the very beginning before we started the session, that Roger was mentioning something about how AI was contributing for certain kind of activities. I'm wondering if you think if AI, I know it's too broad, if AI or other technologies should be improved fast, if you think that there is something that could help in the short mid-term, in terms in the idea of, I know AI is broad, but maybe you think if we could have AI doing this or that, this would be great. Roger?
Okay, I'm just going to quote Bernard Stiegler, who died during the pandemic, and I thank him for his ideas and work. He came up with this idea of the pharmacaon, that we should not consider things like a cell phone as a tool. They're a human organ. There are now people who die if they lose their cell phone, just like they die if they lose their liver or their heart. And so I think we need to think differently about humans now, of how we are so integrated with our technologies that we need to think very differently. So I'll just stop there. This is not a tool, it is a human organ. How do you apply medicine to a cell phone?
Thank you, Roger. So we need to wrap up. We only have 2-3 minutes. So if any of you have anything to add, any other comment, critics, advice, are welcome.
Just an invitation to our participants from Ars Electronica to think that in addition to what you're already doing, the world of humanitarian work and the climate risk management really needs to channel the talent that can inspire towards the talent that can take action. And that bridge is currently very, very absent. I still don't know how exactly to go about it, but if there's anything that any of you individually or collectively think that can be done to bridge those worlds of Ars Electronica, those of us in this panel, and humanitarian work to address climate causes and consequences, reach out, Google us, and we hope to be able to work with you in the future. And thanks, Ricardo and team, for making this happen.
Thank you, Pablo. I don't know, Leah, you want to say some final words?
I don't have much to add at the end. I think we've wrapped it up quite nicely there. I'm thinking about soundscapes of mealworms based on Pablo's idea before, so I'm very keen to follow that up. But, you know, I think in parallel to all of these conversations, I mean, there's so much exciting research happening in this area as well, you know, at a really local level. So I'm excited about ways that, you know, the Balance-Unbalance network and I guess the ideas behind Balance-Unbalance can continue being that connector to really, you know, facilitate knowledge sharing at that local level and seeing what's really having impact and how we can really amplify this work. And, you know, for me, it does come back to really, you know, amplifying those voices that aren't often heard, particularly in the context of Indigenous communities who are really at the front lines of climate change at the moment.
Yes. Yes, we are planning to do something on that in a few months. Yeah. Felipe, I don't know if you want to say something.
In Spanish,
thank you. Or English.
Thank you, Ricardo, Rob, Roger, Pablo, Leah, Ricardo, muchas gracias. Muy interesante el diálogo, muchas ideas. Creo que lo importante para mí es la reconexión con la naturaleza, ¿no? El entendernos nuevamente como algo, parte muy pequeño de este mundo y que debemos tener esa sensibilidad que los artistas o los humanistas como Goethe han pensado desde hace mucho tiempo, y esa reconexión hará posible la supervivencia del planeta, el que pensemos distinto nuestro planeta, ese pacto, ¿no? que tenemos que hacer para que el planeta sobreviva. Nada más, muchas gracias, Ricardo, por invitarme a este panel.
Gracias, Felipe. Roger?
Yeah, just the final thing. My recommendation, I live in Dallas, and people never talk to their neighbors. We not only drive to work, we drive to shopping. During the pandemic, I have started talking to my neighbors, and I have learned so much local knowledge. So my recommendation is talk to your neighbors, and then it gets complicated. Good fences make good neighbors. So you cannot invade other people's privacy. Yep. But we share similar problems if you're in the same neighborhood. Talk to your neighbors.
Thank you so much, Roger. Rob, anything to add?
Yeah, I just put in the chat, actually, because I had a sudden memory of sitting at this hacienda in Manizales late at night with Roger and some of his friends, and we were all of this age category, and Roger put on a blanket and a hat, and we all put on blankets and hats and conversed as elders. So I just had that wonderful memory from my year in Manizales. So there is a way that, you know, that you can meet privately and exchange knowledge as elders. So that's the kind of opposite of what I was saying before, but it was just a nice memory. I think Roger commented on it, that also younger people can come under the blankets. So, okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We need to wrap up. So thank you so much, Roger, Rob, Leah, Pablo, and Felipe. This was Balance-Unbalance. The future started now, think tank number 2. I hope it will be of help. Thank you so much, Marc-André, too. Bye, everyone. Thank you.